The date is October 10th, 2018. The location is the Minnesota Timberwolves practice facility. For weeks, the city of Minneapolis had been a powder keg. The star of the team, Jimmy Butler, had officially demanded a trade, but the front office was paralyzed, caught between a demanding owner and a coach who refused to let his prize asset go. But on this Wednesday morning, the tension reached a boiling point. Jimmy Butler didn't show up to make amends. He didn't come to practice to patch things over. He walked into that gym to execute a surgical, brutal, and utterly cinematic demolition of an entire franchise. In the span of 2 hours, Jimmy Butler transformed a routine morning scrimmage into the most legendary psychological warfare in the history of the NBA. He didn't just beat his teammates, he dismantled them, humiliated the front office to their faces, and used the media to ensure the entire world watched the house burn down. This is the story of the day Jimmy Butler broke the Minnesota Timberwolves. To understand the carnage of that October morning, you have to understand the two worlds colliding in that gym. On one side, you had Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, the God-gifted talents, the #1 picks, the guys who were supposed to usher in a new era of Timberwolves basketball. They were young, they were paid, and they were, in Jimmy Butler's eyes, soft. On the other side was Butler. He was a Marquette product, a man who had fought his way out of homelessness and into the league by doing the dirty work that no one else wanted to touch. To Butler, basketball wasn't a game. It was a religion defined by sacrifice, defensive intensity, and an unrelenting refusal to lose. For the entire 2017-18 season, these two philosophies had been grinding against each other. The Wolves had broken a 13-year playoff drought, but the locker room was rotting. Butler viewed Cat and Wiggins as pampered. They viewed Butler as a toxic, ball-dominant tyrant. By September, the relationship was dead. Butler demanded a trade, but as the preseason dragged on and the front office failed to pull the trigger, Butler was forced back into the building to avoid fines. He knew exactly what he was going to do the moment he stepped through those doors. He wasn't there to practice. He was there to prove once and for all that the Minnesota Timberwolves were nothing without him. The practice started like any other, but the moment head coach Tom Thibodeau, the man who had brought Butler to Minnesota and remained his only ally in the organization, tried to put Jimmy with the starters, the chaos began. Jimmy refused. He didn't just walk to the other side of the court. He orchestrated a heist. He handpicked the third stringers, the guys who were fighting for the very last spots on the roster, the guys whose names most fans didn't even know, and he lined them up against the super team. The scrimmage began, and it wasn't a game. It was a massacre. Butler didn't just score. He controlled the entire geometry of the floor. He locked down Karl-Anthony Towns in the post so effectively that Towns stopped even trying to back him down. He barked insults at the starters, calling them soft, screaming they ain't shit in the middle of a play. He forced turnovers, he grabbed offensive rebounds, and he hit passes that the third stringers, energized by the sheer adrenaline of the spectacle, turned into layups. The starters, the men who were being paid hundreds of millions of dollars to lead the franchise, were shell-shocked. They couldn't get a basket, they couldn't get a stop. The scoreboard wasn't just a number, it was a statement. When it was all said and done, the third stringers had routed the starters 18-6. And Jimmy wasn't finished. As the scrimmage ended and the gym fell into an eerie, suffocating silence, Jimmy marched toward the sideline. GM Scott Layden and Coach Tom Thibodeau were sitting there watching the wreckage of their team. Jimmy didn't lower his voice. He didn't offer a polite handoff. He looked the general manager in the eye and delivered the mic drop of the century. "You effing need me, Scott. You can't win without me." Then he turned, walked out of the gym, and disappeared. He didn't stretch. He didn't talk to the media gathered at the door. He didn't even shower. He simply evaporated, leaving the franchise in a state of utter paralysis. But the heist wasn't over.
While the Timberwolves players were huddling trying to process what had just happened, Jimmy Butler was already in a car heading to an interview with ESPN's Rachel Nichols. It was a pre-planned media strike. By the time the Timberwolves were trying to figure out how to respond, the entire sports world was already watching Jimmy Butler explain exactly why he had destroyed his own team. He told Nichols, "I was honest." Was I brutally honest? Yes. He explained that he was tired of being the only one in the room who prioritized winning above everything else. The reaction was split right down the middle, creating a divide that still exists today in NBA discourse. To the old schoolers, what Jimmy did was an act of pure, distilled leadership. They saw a veteran trying to wake up a lazy, entitled group of younger stars. They believed that if you can't handle a teammate calling you soft during a practice, you'll never survive the pressure of a Game 7 in the NBA Finals. They believed Jimmy was doing the Wolves a favor by forcing them to look in the mirror. But to the new school observers and the Timberwolves faithful, it was a display of pure, unadulterated sociopathy. They saw a man who was so addicted to his own ego that he would happily set his house on fire just to show he had the matches. They saw a player who bullied his younger teammates, undermined his coach, and intentionally tanked the chemistry of a team he was still under contract to help. The consequences were immediate. The Timberwolves had no choice. They traded him to the Philadelphia 76ers weeks later. The era was over, and the fallout was catastrophic. For the next several years, the Timberwolves struggled to pick up the pieces. Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins were left to face the fallout, constantly being asked about the practice and whether they were in fact soft. The team's reputation took a hit, and for a long time, the shadow of that afternoon hung over the organization like a shroud. Jimmy Butler, meanwhile, took his act on the road. He went to Philly, then Miami, and eventually led the Heat to multiple NBA Finals appearances. He doubled down on his hardest worker in the room brand. Every time he stepped on the court, he reminded everyone that he was the guy who could take a group of nobodies and force them to compete with superstars. But looking back at it in 2026, the Jimmy Butler Minnesota practice stands as something much more than just a sports beef. It serves as a permanent case study on the changing nature of the NBA. It was the last stand of a certain type of tough love leadership, the kind that demands total submission to the grind, colliding with a modern era that emphasizes player-friendly environments, mental health, and locker room cohesion. When we watch Jimmy Butler today, we see a legend, a man who has earned the right to bark at his teammates because he has the track record to back it up. But we also see the echoes of Minnesota. We see a player who refuses to accept anything less than perfection. And we see a player who, when he doesn't get his way, is perfectly happy to destroy the foundation he's standing on. The Minnesota Timberwolves eventually found their way back to greatness, and the fans today have embraced a new, more joyful identity built around Anthony Edwards. They've moved past the Butler years, but they've never truly forgotten that day. It remains the most compelling piece of NBA reality TV ever caught on tape. A moment of pure, raw, unfiltered conflict that revealed exactly who Jimmy Butler was and exactly what he thought of the people he shared a court with. It was the heist that went down in history. Jimmy Butler walked into a gym as a disgruntled employee and walked out as a legend, leaving the Minnesota Timberwolves in the dust, wondering exactly what had hit them. The scrimmage ended with 18 points on one side and 6 on the other, but the impact of those 2 hours, that's still being felt today. It was the day Jimmy Butler decided that if he couldn't change the culture of the Minnesota Timberwolves, he would tear it to the ground. And in that gym, in that quiet, echoing space, he did exactly that. The question remains, was he the villain or was he the only one telling the truth? Maybe the answer is that he was both. In the world of the NBA, those two things are often the same. Jimmy Butler didn't just play basketball that day. He forced a franchise to face its own reflection. And when they didn't like what they saw, he made sure they knew who was to blame. "You effing need me," he said. And for one afternoon, in a gym in Minneapolis, he made everyone believe it.